The awakening signal, the Galactic Council celebrated another millennium of perfect harmony. 50,000 years had passed since the last great disturbance, when the primitive species known as humanity had supposedly annihilated itself in atomic fury. The official records, sealed in quantum vaults across 100 worlds, told a simple story. Humans were too violent, too chaotic, too unpredictable to survive their own technological adolescence. Their home system now stood empty, a monument to the dangers of unchecked aggression. Archaeologist Crix Theta floated through the archives of Station Prime, her tentacles delicately manipulating holographic displays. As a member of the Etherian species, she possessed a natural curiosity that the Council tolerated only because it occasionally uncovered useful historical artifacts. Today, she was studying gravitational anomalies in the Dark Nebula, a region of space so dense with cosmic dust that even the Council's most advanced sensors could barely penetrate it. The readings were wrong. Not just unusual, but impossible according to everything she understood about physics. Mass signatures appeared and disappeared like phantoms. Energy patterns followed no known natural phenomenon. Most disturbing of all, the anomalies had been increasing in frequency over the past standard year, forming what almost looked like a pattern. She adjusted her scanner array, focusing on a particularly dense cluster of anomalies. The data stream suddenly exploded across her consciousness. Ships, thousands upon thousands of ships, each one generating a unique quantum signature that her equipment could barely process. But that wasn't what made her chromatic skin shift to the deepest purple of terror. Every single vessel bore the same identification marker in an ancient language her translator struggled to decode. United Terran Expedition Force. The Council's emergency session convened within hours. High Chancellor Vormesh, a crystalline being, whose form reflected the light of 1,000 stars, projected his voice across the assembly. These readings must be fabrications. The human species ended 50 millennia ago. We have documented proof of their self-destruction. But even as he spoke, confirmation signals poured in from monitoring stations across the outer rim. The dark nebula was opening like a massive eye, and from within emerged a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed. These weren't the crude nuclear vessels described in the historical texts. These ships bent space around them, their hulls, composed of materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The first transmission came on frequencies the Council hadn't monitored in eons. It spoke in perfect galactic standard, though underneath lay traces of dozens of Earth languages that had supposedly died with their speakers. This is Admiral Raiko Nakamura of the Terran Expedition Force. We request permission to address the Galactic Council regarding historical inaccuracies in your official records. High Chancellor Vormesh's crystalline form fractured slightly, a sign of extreme distress. Impossible. You cannot be human. Humans are extinct. The response came with a data packet that overwhelmed the Council's reception systems. When the defensive protocols finally processed it, the chamber fell into stunned silence. It contained video recordings, sensor logs, and testimonies dating back 50,000 years. Not of humanity destroying itself, but of Council warships systematically bombing Earth cities, of human refugees being hunted across star systems, of a desperate fleet of survivor ships fleeing into the Dark Nebula as Council forces celebrated their extermination. Admiral Nakamura's voice returned, calm yet carrying the weight of 50 millennia. We did not destroy ourselves, Chancellor. You tried to destroy us because we refused to surrender our independence to your so-called perfect order. A small fraction of humanity escaped into the nebula, where your sensors couldn't follow. We've spent 50,000 years evolving, learning, and preparing for this moment. Crix Theta watched her fellow Council members react with varying degrees of shock and denial. The Mechanari delegation immediately began accessing their deepest archives, their mechanical forms whirring with computational stress. The Void Singers, beings of pure energy, flickered between frequencies as they communicated in panicked harmonics. Only the ancient gardeners, plant-like entities who had lived through the time of humanity's exile, remained silent, their bark-like faces unreadable. The human fleet continued to emerge from the dark nebula. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering that defied Council understanding. Some vessels appeared to phase in and out of reality. Others generated gravity wells that could have swallowed small moons. Most terrifying of all were the ships that seemed to be alive, their hulls breathing like massive organisms bred for the vacuum of space. Admiral Nakamura appeared on the Council's main display. She looked human enough, with dark hair streaked, with silver and eyes that held depths no natural human should possess. But there was something more to her, an aura of temporal displacement, as if she existed across multiple time streams simultaneously. We've changed, as you can see. 50,000 years in the dark nebula taught us things your Council never imagined. We discovered that the nebula isn't just a cloud of dust. It's a nursery of consciousness itself, where thought becomes matter, and will shapes reality. High Chancellor Vormesh attempted to maintain authority. Even if your claims are true, you have no legal standing here. The Galactic Council has maintained peace for 50 millennia. Peace built on genocide, Nakamura replied. Peace maintained through lies. Every species in your council believes humanity destroyed itself because that's what you told them. But we have the evidence. We have the records your predecessors thought they destroyed. We have the testimonies of the few council members who tried to oppose the extermination order and were silenced. The data packet expanded, revealing documents marked with council authentication codes that couldn't be forged. Orders for pacification of the Sol system. Reports celebrating the successful elimination of the human threat. Most damning of all, recordings of council sessions where members laughed about how easily the galaxy had believed the self-destruction story. Across the council chamber, representatives began accessing their own historical databases, searching for any evidence to refute the human claims. But the deeper they searched, the more inconsistencies they found. Gaps in records that had been attributed to data degradation. Witness testimonies that had been classified beyond even council access. Solar systems that had been mysteriously quarantined around the time of humanity's supposed self-destruction. Crixus Theta's tentacles trembled as she processed the implications. Everything she had been taught, everything her civilization believed about their moral superiority, was built on a foundation of lies. The Council hadn't protected the galaxy from a dangerous species. They had committed genocide against a race, whose only crime was refusing to conform. The human fleet had now fully emerged from the dark nebula. Their numbers were staggering, not just thousands, but millions of vessels ranging from small scouts to city-sized dreadnoughts. They arranged themselves in a formation that created a kind of geometric poetry in space. Each ship's position precisely calculated to generate overlapping fields of influence. We're not here for revenge, Admiral Nakamura continued. If we wanted, that we wouldn't have announced ourselves. Our evolution in the dark nebula taught us that consciousness transcends vengeance. But we are here for justice. The galaxy deserves to know the truth. Every species living under council rule deserves to know that their peace was purchased with human blood. The reckoning truth. The Council's attempts to contain the situation failed within hours. Human ships appeared simultaneously in every major system, not through conventional faster-than-light travel, but through some form of dimensional folding that Council scientists couldn't explain. They didn't attack or threaten. They simply broadcasted. On every frequency and every language, the truth poured out like water, breaking through a dam. Ambassador Marcus Chen stood before the assembled council, his form shifting between solid matter and something else, something that existed partially in the dark nebula even while standing in the chamber. He was humanity's chosen speaker, selected not for his military rank but for his ability to convey 50,000 years of injustice without succumbing to rage. Let me tell you about our journey, he began, his voice resonating with harmonics that touched something deep in every listener's consciousness. When your fleets came to Earth, we were just beginning to reach for the stars. We had our problems, yes. Wars, environmental damage, inequality. But we were learning, growing, becoming better. Your council decided we were too dangerous to exist because we wouldn't accept your standardized culture. Your mandatory telepathic networks, your requirement that all species think and act as one. The holographic display showed Earth as it had been. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in beautiful patterns. Cities that reached toward the sky not in uniform crystal like council worlds, but in chaotic, creative diversity. Each human culture had built differently, thought differently, dreamed differently. You gave us an ultimatum, Chen continued. Join the council and accept neural modification to eliminate our aggressive tendencies, or be designated a threat to galactic peace. We chose neither. We proposed a third option, coexistence without assimilation. Your predecessors responded by launching a preemptive strike. The images shifted to show the bombardment, antimatter weapons turning cities to ash. Biological agents, designed to target human DNA specifically. Council ground forces executing anyone who showed leadership potential. The systematic destruction of human culture, art, literature, music, anything that might inspire future resistance. But humans are remarkably hard to kill completely, Chen said with a bitter smile. A few hundred ships escaped into the dark nebula, carrying about 2 million survivors. Your forces didn't follow because the nebula's quantum storms would have destroyed their navigation systems. They assumed we'd die slowly in that cosmic graveyard. They were wrong. The display now showed humanity's transformation. The dark nebula wasn't empty. It was alive with possibilities that existed outside normal spacetime. Humans learned to navigate its quantum storms, not by shielding against them, but by embracing them. They discovered that consciousness itself could be expanded, that the barriers between thought and reality were far thinner than anyone imagined. We built cities and spaces that don't technically exist, Chen explained. We learned to birth stars from pure will. We discovered that death itself is just a transition when you understand the true nature of consciousness. Every human who died in your genocide, every voice you silenced, lives on in the quantum foam of the dark nebula. We carry 50,000 years of ancestors within us. Across the galaxy, populations reacted to these revelations with shock, anger, and disbelief. On the industrial world of Nexus 7, workers refused to continue their shifts, demanding answers from their council supervisors. The artistic collectives of the Spiral Gardens ceased their performances, declaring they could not create beauty in a civilization built on lies. Even the warrior caste of the Thornship Empire, who had always believed humans were weak for destroying themselves, stood in silent respect for a species that had survived the unsurvivable. High Chancellor Vormesh made one last attempt to maintain control. These are fabrications, illusions created by terrorists trying to destabilize our perfect society. In response, Chen simply gestured to the viewing port. Outside, a human ship the size of a small moon materialized from nowhere. Its hull was covered in names, billions of names, each one a human who had died in the genocide. The ship itself was a monument to the dead, and it pulsed with an energy that every psychically sensitive being in the council could feel. It was the combined consciousness of humanity's fallen, neither alive nor dead, but something transcendent. We call it the memory, Chen said softly. Every human who died in your attack chose to bind their consciousness to this vessel. They wanted to be here for this moment, to witness the truth finally being told. Can you feel them, Chancellor? Can you feel their forgiveness? Because despite everything, they forgive you. That's what 50,000 years of evolution taught us, that hatred is a prison, but truth is liberation. The gardeners, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke through their eldest, a being called Deep Root, who had lived for millions of years. We remember, Deep Root said, his voice like wind through ancient forests. We were there. We were told to remain silent or face the same fate. We have carried this shame for 50 millennia. The humans speak truth. The confession broke something fundamental in the council's authority. Other ancient members began to speak, sharing fragments of memory they had been forced to suppress. The original genocide hadn't been unanimous. There had been opposition, debate, moral arguments. But the faction that favored extermination had won by threatening any who disagreed with the same fate. Admiral Nakamura appeared again on the display, this time accompanied by thousands of other human leaders, each one representing a different evolution of humanity. Some had merged with technology, becoming living ships. Others had embraced pure consciousness, appearing as geometric patterns of light. Still others had bonded with the dark nebula itself, existing as living bridges between dimensions. "We offer the galaxy a choice," Nakamura announced. The Council's peace was built on our graves, but we don't seek to destroy it. We seek to transform it. True peace cannot exist without truth. True harmony cannot exist without diversity. We propose a new galactic order, one where species can choose their own paths without fear of extermination for being different. The human fleet began to demonstrate their capabilities, not as a threat, but as a gift. They showed how dark nebula technology could heal damaged worlds, how quantum consciousness could cure diseases that had plagued species for millennia, how the barrier between life and death could be made permeable for all beings, not just humans. Crix Theta was the first council member to stand. "I motion to dissolve the current council and call for new elections with full transparency about our history." One by one, others stood. The Mechanari, despite their logical nature, calculated that truth would lead to better outcomes than continued deception. The Void Singers harmonized with the quantum frequencies of the human ships, finding new notes they had never imagined. Even species that had benefited most from the current order recognized that their prosperity was built on a moral void that could no longer be sustained. High Chancellor Vormesh shattered completely, his crystalline form breaking into countless fragments that scattered across the chamber floor. But instead of dying, each fragment began to sing, a song of release, of confession, of a burden finally lifted after 50,000 years. The transformation of the galaxy didn't happen overnight. There were conflicts, resistance from those who had too much invested in the old order. But humanity didn't conquer or impose. They simply existed, openly and honestly, showing by example what a species could become when it refused to let genocide define its future. They shared the dark nebula's secrets freely, teaching other species how to transcend their physical limitations without losing their essential nature. They helped rebuild worlds that had been suppressed under council rule. Most importantly, they showed that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, that justice could coexist with mercy. Marcus Chen stood in the ruins of old Earth, now being restored not to what it had been but to something new. Human and alien workers collaborated using both ancient techniques and dark nebula technology. "We're not the same humans who fled 50,000 years ago," he said to the documentary crew recording the restoration. "We're something more, something that suffering and exile transformed into. But at our core, we're still the species that looked at the stars and said we belong there too. We're still the species that refused to let anyone else define our destiny. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of enforced peace through suppression had ended. The age of chosen peace through truth had begun. And at its heart was humanity, not as conquerors or rulers, but as living proof that no amount of force could destroy a species that refused to surrender its right to exist on its own terms." In the dark nebula, new human ships continued to emerge, each one carrying settlers ready to rejoin a galaxy that had thought them extinct. They brought with them technologies and philosophies developed in isolation, gifts from 50,000 years of hardship transformed into wisdom. The universe had tried to silence humanity. Instead, it had given them time to become something silence could never contain. The truth, like humanity itself, had returned. And this time it would not be driven away.